Hello, 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 and welcome to Just Talking with the beautiful Ayesha and Magueda. How are you, Ayesha?
Oh, I'm good. My gorgeous friend, Gwenda Lambert. How are you?
I'm fabulous. I'm fabulous today. So this is pre-recorded um, because we wanted to continue on the vein of family estrangement because it really
Mm-hmm.
does affect so many people.
Hmm.
And I also know that it's a big focus of some of the modules or the training that you're doing through your purposeful path, Aisha.
Yes.
And again, the last time we talked about, basically it was the continuation of, oh my God, family dinners. That, what's it like when we're going and we're being around family at the holidays, which started with Heather and I.
Hmm.
So today we are going to delve further into some of the impacts of family estrangement. And I guess the one thing that I want to be able to add here before we even start is the fact that the more we blow off our emotional expression, our hopes, dreams, and expectations
Hmm.
of being part of a normal relationship, that N word, that's about it, that one, normal.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
So let's keep that in mind through any of these sessions that we talk about, right?
Hmm.
Whenever we're applying any kind of label that's making our experience unworthy of reflection. So that's my, does that, so I'm going to pass it over to Aisha and get her thoughts on this because we just talk. And as usual, we don't like practice any of this stuff because it leads to a more organic conversation. So what do you think of those two ideas? And then take us deeper into the impacts of family estrangement in your experience.
Thank you, Gwenda. I think you raised some really good points here. And I think that that idea of what is normal is something that really people struggle with because what you're doing is you're comparing whatever is happening in your life with a kind of, I would say, like a superficial and a manufactured perspective of what's happening in somebody else's life or a whole bunch of other people's lives, right? So we have this idea of kind of um, that that everyone should be homogenous, right? And homogenous is normal, and that's the construct. And in fact, the issue is that it's not. In fact, normal homogeneity is goes against the norm because even if you look at groups of animals, right, when they're together in herds or when they travel together as a pack or anything like that, you don't see everybody exactly the same. They're not the same height, they're not the same weight, they're not the same size, nothing like that, right? They don't even have the same functions in within that group that they have. So heterogeneity or diversity is actually the norm. That is actually what's normal. And so the first thing is to separate ourselves from this idea that we are not normal. We are normal for us. That and that in itself, what you were saying to your second point about worthiness is when we attach normalcy to worthiness, right? So when we stop conforming to the idea that we have to be normal to be worthy, then we give ourselves that room to really expand our view of not only ourselves but also our situation. It softens a little bit because we're not looking at it through this harsh lens of comparison and always coming up short, right? Not us, not the situation. That's not to say that people don't go through difficult things and they don't have challenges. It's just that we look at it with a more broader perspective, a deeper perspective, and a more understanding perspective, right? So those two ideas that you talked about, normalcy and worthiness, those are really, I mean, that's how those two things tie together in terms of how we look at um, our situation with our own families or within ourselves, right? What do you think about that?
Yes, agreed to all of it. And that's and I think and again, that's why I wanted to start off with that. Even though we
Mhm.
started this conversation and we've peppered these conversations with the fact that, like last week, you are the start of your own inner circle.
That's right. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
whenever, and maybe, there's some people that like to chat a lot. There's some people that don't like to talk at all.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. Yeah.
it's just really understanding, are you just talking to fill space and time and sound, or are you talking because you want to communicate something?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, there we
I
go.
think that's it. That's really powerful because a lot of people just speak because it's what's expected of them or what is quote unquote normal for them. And a friend of mine shared with me the other day that good leaders are reflective leaders, right? And I would say that that applies to everybody, that we are better able to navigate, we're better able to assess, we're better able to respond when we take the time to reflect, right? What is happening? Why is it happening? Sort out our own feelings about it. What are we experiencing? Where is that coming from? I talk about tapping into your core elements for this specific reason, is that that is your GPS. That is your model to figure out what is happening and what you need to do to take care of yourself in order to be more responsive in that situation, right? So let me take you back to what you said earlier just about how we look at our lives. And I want to ask you, have you ever, or when was the last time that you sat down and thought about your quality of life?
I do that on a semi-regular basis, at least every 3 months, max, like at least 4 times a year.
Okay, tell
Where
me what that looks like. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, no,
I
no,
didn't know
no.
you were.
So especially, and I think that's a really good, just to tie this all together into the whole fact of the impact of family estrangement and all that stuff. So you're looking right now, this is 10 years. 2013 is 10 years for me since I got my diagnosis of post-traumatic stress. And
Mhm.
what happened at that time was I kept, and I still kept trying to make sure to handle the emotional needs, or what I perceived was the emotional needs of my family, my friends, definitely not me.
Mm.
Um, so I make that purposeful now, that I can, and not with glowing adoration all the time, but I try to be able to see where I have improved in taking my focus from out here to in here over the last 10 years. So
Mhm.
even in before that, I would do a silence, 3 days of silence 4 times a year in my apartment. I wouldn't engage with anybody. And that
Mhm.
was because that was the beginning. I was probably 30 something, 40 something. 40. So now I'm 58. I'm going to be 58. So that's when it started in earnest.
Right.
When I was like, okay, I need to quiet because stuff's trying to come out and I'm dead, I'm busy, busy, busy. And I'm not giving myself the space or time. That's when the conversation started. And in and out of different modalities my whole life. But here's the other thing. When it comes to family estrangement, I kept trying to, my focus until probably the last, well, 5 years for sure, 6 years, was about how can I connect with them instead of how can I connect with me.
Mhm.
So my focus now, and I would say it's more than every 3 months, because now I'm starting to notice when I am connecting with myself a lot more effectively, and I'm throwing my little cheer party. 10 years ago, it would have been a pity party. Oh my God, look at this. I'm never going to be
Mhm.
normal.
Right.
And now it's like, man, look at this. You go, girl. So
Yeah.
so excellent question. Love it. So that's again, and I think we were just talking about this before we started, is that I had a real aha moment like last week. It was last week where I was out in the morning, I'm on my walk, and we have that voice in our head.
Mhm.
And it was like, I am worthy. And it was
Mm-hmm.
like, and then I literally, I'm walking, but even the voice in my head stopped and went, yeah, man, I feel that. I
Mm-hmm.
feel that. I am worthy.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you know anything about I am statements,
Mm-hmm.
I started with I am statements 1,000 years ago. Like, oh my God, I was 20 something. And I didn't really understand until last week or 2 weeks ago when I had this I am worthy. And it was like, yeah, yeah, damn right I
Mm-hmm.
am. So it's like not fake it till you make it. It's being able to reflect on how you're showing up and the fine balance between, am I doing this to criticize? Am I doing this as the observer, or am I doing this with an outcome? Is this a task I'm doing, or is this just like the thing I would do if I chatted with you, Ayesha, and you did something that was out of character? I sensed that you were a little off. I would say, hey, are you okay today? So it's from that kind of unconditional love,
Mm.
where it's sort of like, hey, are you okay? Like, are you okay? Like, you good? That's wow. What a great question. What a great coach. Anyways, go ahead.
That that's a great answer that you gave. You talked about a lot of things that have to do with our perspective, that have to do with personal development, that have to do with processing, that are about awareness, connection to self, uh, looking at what are the habitual ways that we respond to things. Why are we responding that way? What is our focus in a relationship? Are we constantly thinking about pleasing the other people? When do we turn around and look at ourselves? And those are all really important elements of thinking about what's our quality of life. And I think that when we look at family estrangement, there is a huge connection there between the family estrangement and the quality of life. So again, family estrangement is any kind of situation where and it runs the gamut from not having any communication at all from your family of origin to having some kind of contact or some kind of limited engagement, right? And everything that comes in between, or even having regular engagement with them. But having that sense of estrangement, and estrangement is about not feeling belonging, not feeling safe, not feeling included, not feeling seen, not feeling heard. And so you can be in a family dynamic where that is the norm, right? And you may think of that as being normal, right? But what we want to do is we want to extrapolate from that about where that shows up in terms of your life and how you're interacting with it, exactly the things that you were talking about. So on a identity level, for example, so if we think of our quality of life is very much impacted by us, whether we feel like we belong somewhere. And when our identity is fractured because of family estrangement. So you're not showing up. Um, a lot of us, and I'll speak for myself, my experience of it is not feeling like you're showing up as your whole self, because there's a part of yourself that is either shut down or it's fragmented or you're disconnected from it because of that family estrangement. Your family of origin, whatever the nature of that family of origin is your formative bond to who you are, right? And when that breaks, then there is a part of us that is lost or that's shut down. And so we're if we don't connect with that, reconnect with that, heal it, hold it, process what's going on, we're not able to then reintegrate that into ourselves, right? And that has a bigger impact in a lot of different areas. So let's talk about, first of all, health. You're talking about any health issues that you might have. You can see that at any stage of life, that the degrees of separation, physical, emotional, they 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 affect how our body functions, right? So you may find that you have physical or psychological health issues. You might find that you have that your emotional engagements are very painful, and in the wake of that, you might experience things like sleeplessness, or anxiety, or restlessness, or hyper awareness,
Mm-hmm.
hyper vigilance, right? It causes a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, low self esteem. You may go one gamut. You might lose weight, you might go the other gamut and you might gain a lot of weight because of the family estrangement. You might experience acute or chronic illness that's related to the stress of what you're carrying. You may experience a lot of chronic pain, right? There is impact both, and that impact does go both ways. If you're the person that is estranged from someone, meaning that um, you're the one who made the choice to leave that relationship, you're going to experience things. And if you are the person who was left, someone left you, and you don't have that bond, you're also going to experience those things, right? So physically, there's a lot of impact of family estrangement. Now, a lot of this also ties into grief and trauma, right, Gwen?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm listening to everything that you're saying, and I agree with it. The interesting thing with grief and loss, the challenge is that, and again, why I brought that up in the beginning of this call is when we negate our own emotions around it, we're not giving our grief space. Mm-hmm. And the biggest grief, and just to use this as an example, I want to actually put in another example as well, is my father was never really emotionally available because of his mental illness, not just mental health, where we're having a period of a depressive period after the loss of somebody or the loss of something big, or it's normal to have a depressive period. Depression, on the other hand, is something that's a little bit more serious. So again, but I just reflected on a time when there was somebody I worked with, and his father was a great father, and he ended his life by suicide. And one of the things my dad would do was threaten that as a means of, was he in pain? I don't have any doubt, but he used it as emotional manipulation, right? And that was part of the mental illness. And the interesting thing was having a conversation with him one day, and this is why, and I was yelled at, because it's like, well, you didn't find, and it's like, no, but the saddest part is I lived my whole life with him knowing that he was that unhappy. And you're missing something that you had. So the hopes, dreams, and expectations is also something that really surprised me when I used this grief recovery method. And this is because it's not therapy. You're not going in and saying, oh, I don't get along with men well. It's, you're able to look at your life and see where there may be trauma. And especially if we are denying, because this is our family of origin, exactly as you said. This is our bond at the beginning, good, bad, or indifferent. We don't know any different until we get out in the world. We don't know, until we start, we're indoctrinated with television, showing the nuclear family and everybody's smiling. And it's like, even if they have a fight, it's all over by the end of the half an hour show or the hour show or the 2-hour movie. And, the good part with that is it brings up issues that maybe we should talk about. The bad part is, especially when we're coming up to the Hallmark holidays. We talked about this the last time, where we can go, oh, well, I want to have this family that, wears all these ugly sweaters and does this whole, and it's almost like, oh, if we do that, then we'll be happy. If this,
then that, yeah.
And so I think that, I think it's more important to, and this, just to flip back to that conversation I was having that with that guy at work, my heart broke for him, because it's like, I'm missing the concept of a father. You're missing your father, and if you're just going to be angry at me, then you're not going to take the time to go into your grief and say, what is it that I still need to do to complete this relationship? And that's the biggest part when it comes to family estrangement. we're not meant to get along with everybody on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, we see things differently than other people in our family. We need to be able to say, okay, but am I expecting them to be anything different than who they are? And then
Yeah.
we brought up the last time, there's two of us that have to engage if we want to consciously do any kind of work together. So it's important to remember that your work on how you feel will change your perspective. The other people may not know that your work is changing the balance between you two.
Mm-hmm.
But your focus should be on how do I make it so that this is safe? I have agency. I can go in. I also feel comfortable enough to say, you know what? This isn't doing it for me right now. I'm leaving
Mm-hmm.
early.
Yep,
You know
exactly.
what? I'm not feeling it today. I'm not going at all.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's my 2 cents there. Well, more like $1.50, but
It's all good. It's all good. I think that when we're talking about the different ways that family estrangement manifests, and definitely these are things that we want to look at in terms of grief and trauma and having to um, how we process them, how we experience them, how we move through them, right? And the physical implications that I talked about, that's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is also just emotionally how we get messy, right? So there's the messiness emotionally. You've got eating disorders, you have addiction, you have workplace conflict, you have relationship difficulties, you may have difficulties with life management, with money, with those kinds of things, because that those skills that that you would expect to learn in a family, in a solid and what's the word I'm looking for? Functional
mm-hmm.
family environment. Those skills were never imparted to you. So there's a lot of shame associated with that. So that emotional toll that people experience because of um, because of family estrangement, and then having to have all these coping behaviors. And I know in the grief recovery world, they're called disturbs, right? The things that we use to kind of process in whatever way possible what we're experiencing without actually having to look at what we're experiencing, right? So there's that element of it, and then right alongside of that are two of the things I talked about, workplace conflict and relationship difficulties, is all about the fact that we didn't learn how to communicate. How do you communicate with someone that you disagree with? How do you come to a disagreement? How do you respectfully disagree with each other and continue to work together, right? How do you ask for what you need? How
Mm.
do you know what you need, right? If you're always the one serving other people because you're worried that if you don't serve them, they'll leave you, which is all around bonding and attachment and abandonment.
Mm.
All of those things that we're carrying, right? And for a lot of people, it's unacknowledged, it's unprocessed, it's unresolved, right? And those are things that are impacts of the family estrangement that we don't necessarily think are related to family estrangement, but really, because it's family of origin, because it's formative, it's
Mm.
developmental, we've experienced those losses. We have not been able to grieve through them. We've not been able to process them. So then what happens? We are not able to, we don't understand that they're actually coming out in all these different ways in our life, and it's affecting our quality of life, right? The good news is all these skills are learnable.
Mm-hmm.
All of this stuff is workable. So when we find the right people that support us to see, okay, where is the impact? What is happening? Where is the stuff coming out? How is it impacting me? How is it impacting the quality of my life? I think, some those of us who do this work, we're aware of quality of life, what it means. I don't I don't know I would say in my social circle, I'm not sure how many people I know that actually actively sit down and think about what is the quality of my life in my relationships? What is the quality of life in my work? How happy am I? What are the things that I'd like to work on for my personal development? Like, this is not something that I was never socialized to do this. I learned to do this through the work that I've done on myself through my life. I know that that's the way that you've learned it as well. So I think that the idea of accessing the skills and being able to use the skills then to make the kind of changes that we're looking at, that we want to create in our lives, knowing that that's available and that's accessible, that gives us a different perspective, that we don't have to be stuck in the suffering. We don't have to continue to act out. We can actually move through through what we're experiencing through the family estrangement and come to a different place.
Exactly. Oh, totally agree. And the interesting thing is, and again, this is where I want to start focusing my connection with clients, is on the fact that if we do not stand still long enough to say, okay, what are my interactions like? How if I ask somebody, I'm always going to ask somebody, how are you? Because I have that is part of who I am. But there's a number of times where, why do you ask so many questions? Why do you talk to strangers? Why do you? And it's like, because this is who I am. That's what I do. And if we, and before, as an example, because in my family of origin, made fun of, that whole touchy-feely thing. And we may not all be the same people, and we're not. But it's like, the difference is now I start walking through the world going, I still can't stop myself from being that empathetic, intuitive person, but instead I'm beating myself up. Oh, I should stop being weird. So somebody says something, and I used to bounce between that I'm unique and the oh, maybe there is something wrong with me. And then how many times are we in, I was in the workplace and there was somebody that nobody told this woman no, and she was bullying a lot of people, and it would blame it on everybody. And then you're watching the impact of that on your entire workplace. And maybe the person in charge doesn't know how to deal with difficult people or bullying, because maybe that's their father, maybe that's their mother. And this is the funny thing. It's funny, it's not funny. We are what we learn. And when we come to, again, when we tend to look for therapy, or we can get business coaching, which is helping us, be a better leader. Well, first you have to start with emotional honesty. You have to be able to call out what smells in your own world. Who moved my cheese? Is it just Limburger, or is it something that's, a little bit nicer? So it's like, you can read all those books and intellectualize that. But if you cannot, not but, because that discards everything. It really does. If you cannot stand in your own silence, in your own heart, and do that, I am worthy. Yeah, I am worthy. Wow. If you're not at that point, that's when, and again, this doesn't have to be mental illness. Just because you start looking at your emotional landscape doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. And as a matter of fact, there's something fabulous about you, because then whenever you come to a conversation, it's not expecting the other person to be attacking you or expecting somebody else to be a problem, which is where we started with, oh my God, family dinners and talking about perspective. When we're coming in to see that family of origin, do we expect to have a good time, or do we expect to be, penalized or made fun of? And so that's the other part when it comes to humor. And are we using humor to deflect, or are we using humor to include so we can all have a laugh together? Are we reflecting on times when we truly did something that was just like, oh my God, ridiculous? And that's something that can bond you. So again, I hope that makes a little bit of sense, that, that was the whole joke years ago, blame everything on our mothers. But seriously, nobody's perfect. Our parents are not perfect. Our siblings are not perfect. If we cannot also take the time to acknowledge that maybe our parents weren't perfect, that just because they were loving people doesn't mean that they didn't do stuff that left a mark. And the more you ignore it, the more it insinuates itself in how you're talking to a subordinate, how you're talking to somebody that's working for you, how you're, I know once I was trying to be hard. This guy was this really nice guy, and I would be like, you got to do this, and I was trying to be firm. And thank God, one of the other coworkers, one of the other guys that work for me, came up and said, you're really being hard on him. And it's like, I wasn't aware, and I apologized. And it was like, thank you. So I also hope that we keep in mind that it doesn't matter where people are in the ladder. There's a way to respectfully hold your ground and say, hey, this isn't right. And I hope that that's also something that you get from being allowed to use your own voice, and using it in a way that's not antagonizing or making something worse. It's just saying, I'm in this situation, and this doesn't work for me, without attacking other people. What are your thoughts on that? I just threw that in for fun, not for fun, but.
Mm-hmm. I think that, it is all about that awareness and taking that time to get situated in your own, as you call it, the emotional landscape, gives us that clarity to be able to assess things a little bit differently. So in the family estrangement model, people who have experienced loss and abandonment and disconnection, they don't just experience it in that moment. They they experience it in all kinds of other situations. In some situations, they create it because that's what they're expecting. So even when people give you safety, even when people talk to you nicely, you don't believe it, or you don't appreciate, or you're sure that they're going to figure out that you don't deserve it, and then you're going to lose it, right? Exactly. As you say, it insinuates itself into all kinds of other circumstances. And so coming to the idea, which is one thing that you started with, which is your expectations. What are your expectations for your life? If your expectations for your life are so low because the bar has been set so low because you feel like you're not going to get what you want, you're not worthy of getting what you want, you don't deserve what you want, people around you are never going to give you what you want, and even if they do, it'll be for a short period of time, or something will happen and you'll lose them or they'll lose you, whatever the case is. It's about really recognizing where that perspective lives, because that perspective doesn't, it is perpetuated in the present, but it really lives in the past. Right. So to be able to look at it from that lens and separate from it and say, okay, you know what, this doesn't belong to right now. This belongs to way back here. And when you were saying that example of how someone came to you and said, well, yep, you're being really hard on that person also, and I'm not saying that family trauma is the reason, but family estrangement is the reason, but they're not able to speak up for themselves. They're not able to say to you on their own, hey, actually, I don't like the way you're talking to me. Please don't talk to me like that. If you're going to continue to talk to me like that, I am going to leave this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They don't have the skill, they don't have the courage, they don't have the confidence. It could be any number of things, right? But it's really looking at all of those situations where we are settling for something we don't want because our expectations are aligned with absolutely the bottom of the barrel. Where does that come from? For people who have experienced family estrangement, that is something that they're very familiar with, right? Is I'm not going to put my expectations up because I'm never going to get that. Now, the interesting thing is that you may find that you're able to have achievements in some areas and just not have them in others. So you might do really, really well at work, right? You may be able to collaborate with people at work. You may be great in teams at work because you don't have an emotional investment in them,
Mm-hmm.
But when you go into a family situation or a relationship or friendships, then you struggle because you don't know how to make those emotional connections. You don't know how to be emotionally honest to yourself, let alone to other people. And then you're not able to maintain those relationships. So there is a lot of variation in what happens. And family estrangement is not always something that is only painful.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people carry a lot of guilt because family estrangement can also provide them with relief. Having that distance from
Mm-hmm.
the constant stress, the constant pain, the interactions that cause them so much grief and so much self questioning, lowers their self esteem. They may find relief in that. And then that relief also causes them to feel guilty. Right. So it's very, there's a lot of complex layers, and everybody's situation is different. Everyone is going to experience something different in that scenario. So having someone like yourself to work through the grief aspect of it, having someone like myself to work through the context of family estrangement and situating oneself in your life and figuring out, okay, what are the things that I want that are going to improve the quality of my life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are things that are all teachable, they're learnable, and once you have them, you're never going to go back. You're never going to go backwards. That's the thing about these kind of one size fits all solutions, is they don't work, they don't last for a long time. You want something that's really going to be a deep and lasting solution for you. So these are the things I think that, you know, when we look at family estrangement and its impact, we also want to look at it in the context of what are the things that we can do that can effectively and sustainably help us to move through them.
Absolutely. And as you said, decide what is the life that you want to lead.
100%.
You
Yeah,
know,
that's right.
just the one thing to add, and that's the great thing that you also put in there about, this is one of the things that you see all the time. You have somebody that's technically good. So
Mm-hmm.
I was in the insurance industry for ages. They're a technically good underwriter. They know their stuff. They know industries, they know liabilities, they know laws, they know all of that stuff. But then they become a manager and they're horrible
Yeah, that's right.
because that emotional connection, that empathy, that nurturing is may or may not have been available at the beginning of life. So you know, and then and a lot of times I think that causes a lot more stress because we don't, as you say, when we're in the work world too, we're not necessarily encouraged, like more so now, about having effective leadership, which is where, like, you're talking about diversity, inclusion, like, does what you do in all the work, no matter what level you're at, include understanding of what the people are around you, include the understanding of what type of project you're doing. You know, I used to joke that I could talk management, underwriting, and frontline worker. They all have a different aspect and a different view of what's happening in that organization. And
Mm-hmm.
having having a working knowledge of all those different aspects is important, because then you know when things are off the rails. It's the same with our emotional landscape. If we don't know ourselves, like, oh, I'm talking to this person, every time I have to go talk to this person, I feel a tightness in my stomach. Every time I go over here, I feel a tightness in my throat. Every
Mm-hmm.
time. And those are things that we don't get a user's manual, right? We don't get
Mm-hmm.
a user's manual for this. But we show up in all these things, and you know, again, in my 20s, I was in charge of, you know, over people. I wasn't in a place at all of being emotionally mature. How many of us are? But I could connect with people, and that's great. I could get them all going in other ways, but I know now with reflection the ways where being an outcast in my own family, intentionally or unintentionally, because that's the other part. Little Ayesha, little Gwenda, it's not up to us to defend those people who we may love. It's up to us to say, little Ayesha, little Gwenda, what's in your heart? What didn't you get to say? And And it's really funny because um when it comes to work, building a great team, Jack Welch always said the bottom 10% should always know who they are. So it goes the other side too, where, oh, I don't want to hurt people's feelings. I don't want to tell them where they're not doing well. And then instead, all of a sudden, you have some new manager come in, and you've gone from being this wonderful employee to like, what do you mean I'm not meeting expectations? How did that happen? And the whole performance review situation, all that kind of stuff is like, you're really a mentor first. And I know that there's a lot more programs like yours, which actually says, well, when you say this, are you actually helping people feel included, like they can say whatever they want? And then on the other hand, if you're not through your own stuff, you still can't see where you might be saying the right words, but you're not really listening for the answer. You're not really looking to see where, because you're doing all the right stuff instead of actually starting from the heart and working out, as we said last week, your inner circle starts with you, right?
Yep.
So that's my 2 cents. Well, again, another $1.50.
I think, yeah, I mean, there's so much there that you've talked about, and I really appreciate that you raise these different things so we can explore them. I think that, I think, let me just talk a little bit about workplace, which is a little stepping away from family estrangement, in that there is the whole thing about understanding oneself, is that when you take the time to understand yourself, it only follows that you take the time to understand what's happening outside of you. You understand it better in other people. You understand situations more clearly, right? With leadership in organizations, I find as a business coach that one of the main issues is that people don't train their organizations do not train their leaders, right? Mm-hmm. They don't train their leaders to be compassionate and understanding leaders. And when I say compassionate and understanding, I don't mean that they're friendly. I don't mean that they'll have a chat with you in the boardroom. I don't mean that they're going to take you out to lunch. What I mean to say is that they will be transparent with you, that they will be active listeners, that they will work with you to resolve situations, but not necessarily take on the ownership of that if it's something that you are able to resolve yourself. It is that they will be fair, that it's not, if you ask me, would you rather have a leader that's empathetic or a leader that's fair? I would take a leader that's fair 100 times over, because it doesn't matter how empathetic you are. If you are not fair in your assessments with people, if you're not dealing with people where and acknowledging them and valuing them and giving worth to them for the contributions that they make and the fact that they are part of the team, then I don't, yeah, for me, give me somebody who's fair, because that's what you're looking for in leadership. The other thing is that in leadership, leadership requires the depth of thinking to recognize whether something that's happening is only superficial or whether there's other things happening underneath that also need to be addressed. Is there a problem with the policy? Is there a problem with the procedure? Is there a problem with the inclusive teams? Is there something happening in the environment, in the organizational culture? Is there something that the other manager or a manager is doing that is not resolving the situation, and that they're kind of stepping back because of their own conflict averseness? They don't want to get involved with something, right? So there's all kinds of different elements there. When you were talking about the woman from your office who was bullying, yes, there's one part of it is the manager didn't want to get involved. The other part of it, what was the policy? What was the procedure? How were the employees being supported? Was there any place for them to lodge a safe complaint? Did the organization have what is it called? A non they wouldn't be penalized if they spoke up. Do they have some kind of policy around
like
that?
Confidentiality, like that you don't anonymous.
but not just confidentiality though,
Yeah.
but that they would not be actively penalized, that they would not be repercussions to them of speaking out. So even if they had a confidential place to speak out, that there weren't any ramifications of them speaking out, right? So when we're looking at that stuff, when you are aware in yourself of what's happening to you, and if you're a leader, then you are going to see all all the details.
Yeah.
You're going to start understanding the complexity of the situation and not handle it superficially, not just try and put a band-aid on it so that 2 years later that issue comes back up again, right? Not for yourself, not for your organization, not for the people that you're leading, right? And this is the thing, when we start disconnecting from trauma like family estrangement, like domestic violence, like
Yeah.
any kind of other thing that we've experienced in our lives, when we start to reconcile with our grief, when we start working through our trauma, when we start acknowledging and recognizing the impact and then healing from that, then we can more effectively, sustainably, compassionately, fairly like show up in the world,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Exactly. Look at us. Now we could go. I know we're probably close to 40 minutes at this point.
Yes, we are. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what happens. We just, and again, I know we started veering off. And again, there will be more topics on this as we go into November. So we're going to see Ayesha here first, third, or fifth week, as last week was the fifth week of October. And then we'll see Heather here on the second and fourth weeks. So I have really, really appreciated our conversation as always. I think it's really great when we review the overlapping. Like I always say that we compartmentalizing helps only in certain places, but you have to be able to open that door and let that stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting because we're also not, when we bring ourselves to work, we bring our whole selves to work. And it's up to our work on this planet, above and beyond anything else, is to get to know ourselves and figure out what brings us joy, you
Yep.
know? And
Absolutely.
and the last thing I would, because again, sort of first do no harm. If you're in a situation where somebody's telling you their truth and it may not come out perfectly and they may be overwhelmed, please encourage that. Like as long as they're not physically attacking you, or that you're safe. Because for a lot of us, finding our voice takes that first time, like when we tie our shoes. We want to, hopefully there's an encouraging place to be able to say, hey, this doesn't feel right to me, and be able to honor the fact, well, thank you for sharing, thank you for having the courage that must have been hard. And I think just embrace emotionality so that it doesn't overwhelm you, especially if it's coming from somebody else. But that's just me and the grief. I like that personal emotional stuff, not so much like in the corporate world. It can be embraced in a safe way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think,
Those thoughts, yeah.
yeah, no, I was just going to finish off by saying I think that the main thing is to really, again, have that discerning eye so that because we have to be aware when someone is saying something of what is the impact on us and how are we responding to that? What is the communication that we're providing back to people as well? And if it causes us to react, if it causes some kind of a reaction that we have to be self-responsible for, that we take that time to reflect. And you don't necessarily have to agree with somebody. You don't have to, um, validate what people are saying. You can say, thank you for sharing. I'm going to take some time to think about what you've said, and give yourself that time to process and give yourself that time to reflect. And especially in family estrangement situations where as humans, we are, you know, we want to belong, we want to connect. I don't know, there are for me, there are days when I wish that things were different, and I wish that I could make them different. And there are some days where I just think, okay, it's just better for me to accept that this is where they are and move on from that. And so when we come to that place we where the heart desires connection, but when the connection is made, it is not a loving connection, it's not a respectful connection, it's not a nourishing connection, then we have to kind of step back and use that discerning eye to say, I can I can respect where someone else is without engaging it. And that I think is really important, is to be able to just hold, you can hold that space. But again, like you said, not even physically attacking. If someone is attacking you, if they're taking away your safety or your agency, or they're undermining your worth, things like that, you actually don't have to stand there and take it, or sit there and take it, or be a part of it. You don't have to do that, right? You have choices.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But great conversation as always. Thank you so much, Glenda.
Yes. Ooh. So there we go. So this is, thank you for coming and seeing us. And again, Just Talking on YouTube is now, because we've got handles, is just at Just Talking with Gwenda. If you just put ask at Just Talking Gwenda, and it'll bring up, it's Gwenda and guests now, because it's Heather and Ayesha, and I'm the only constant. So there you go. But so that's the YouTube channel as well, which has all of our Just Talking from the beginning, right?
Mm.
um
Yay.
it's our little journeys, so exciting.
I know. We're coming up on our anniversary, right?
I know we're gonna have to have a party, like balloons or something. I'll put a balloon like here or here,
Yeah.
something.
Sounds good.
Or we can do a walkie talkie.
We could do a
We
walkie-talkie.
could do
Yeah,
a live together. Oh
absolutely.
no, we can't. Well, we could. Anyways, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Okay, love you, Aisha. Thank you so
Love you
much.
too.
If
Thank
you have
you. Thanks,
any
everyone.
comments, please put them in
Please do. Yeah.
below. If you have
Yep.
any questions about family estrangement, please let us know.
Yeah.
And your feedback is most welcome. And it's not just a conversation between us, which we love having these anyway. So,
That's right.
okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye. See you soon.